Hi, I'm Ray with yet another strange tale. Tales of the Unexpected. Do you remember that? That was a good, they were half-hour programmes, weren't they, I believe. This one, this is strange. Well, they're all strange. When I was back in my late teens, very early 20s, I was learning Morse code. As you probably know, I'm a licensed radio amateur. And I had my B licence, and to get the Class A, the full licence, I had to take a Morse code test, an exam, at a coastguard station. I went to North Foreland and did my exam, where I passed, luckily. But coming up to the test, what I used to do was tune around shortwave, having a listen to any Morse code I could find. And back in those days, there was a lot of Morse code around. It's not used so much these days. It's still in use, but back then, Morse code was all over the place. You could, wherever you tune, there's Morse code. So I was tuning around, just listening to Morse code, writing it all down, just to practice and get my speed up. There was one frequency in particular, 500 kilohertz. We used to call it 500 kcs. That was all to do with shipping, land-based stations, ships, fishing vessels, all this sort of thing on 500 kcs, and it was all Morse code. So I was always monitoring 500 kcs. And I was just in what I call my shack, which was a shed down the garden back then. Had all my amateur radio gear, and that's where I built things, transmitters and everything. So I'm listening, I'm just monitoring 500 kilohertz, and I heard SOS. Now that's distinctive, SOS. I'd never heard that on the radio before. You probably find a lot of people know that SOS, even though they don't know Morse code, they will know SOS. So I heard SOS, and my immediate thought was, quick, what's this? A ship in distress. So I'm writing down SOS. I then received the ship's name and call sign, and the position of the ship, the coordinates. I wrote all that down, and just 2 words, engine fire. So I thought, this is amazing, I'm actually listening to a live SOS. So then he went quiet, he went off the air, and I'm listening for the response from one of the coast stations or another ship. Nothing. I turned the volume right up, nothing. I thought, well, that's strange, no one's replied to him. Then he came on again. SOS, 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 sending the message, engine fire, the ship's name. And he then went off, and I listened. Nothing. I thought, this is odd. No one's answering him, unless I perhaps couldn't hear. Someone was answering and I couldn't hear. Perhaps they were too far away from where I was. I mean, I had the coordinates, but of course back then I couldn't just type it into a computer and see exactly where he was, pinpoint him somewhere in the sea. You'd have to get an atlas and look it up and work it all out that way, which I didn't have in the shack at the time. So I didn't know where he was. After the 3rd time, he's calling SOS the same things, the coordinates. I thought, this is a bit odd. I better do something. I didn't know what. What can I do? I couldn't transmit on that frequency, not on 500 kilohertz. I couldn't reply. I could on certain other marine frequencies that we won't go into. So I decided to ring the Coast Guard. I've never done that before, so I went indoors to where the phone was, got the phone book, looked up Coast Guard, or did I dial the operator? I can't remember. I looked up, anyway, I can't remember. I got hold of a Coast Guard station, and where you can report things, you see someone in trouble on the beach or whatever. And I said to this chap, I said, I'm a radio amateur and I've been listening around to Morse code, and I explained, I said, I've heard the SOS, and I told him the ship's name, the call sign, the coordinates, and I said, I've not heard anyone answer, that's why I'm phoning you. And he said, I'm surprised no one's answered. If you're hearing it, I don't know why we aren't. And I got the impression he thought that I was mucking around, a bit of a hoax. And he said, okay, could I have your name, address and phone number, which I gave him gladly, because it wasn't a hoax. I was telling the truth. I wasn't lying. I wouldn't do a thing like that to the Coast Guards. Anyway, he said, okay. He said, we'll have a listen, and he said, well, we'll look into it, something like that. I can't remember his words. He did take it, although I think he thought I was messing around, it was a hoax. I think he took it seriously. You have to take these things seriously. If someone reports something to the Coast Guard, they can't just say, oh, well, he's messing around, ignore that. So they obviously had to look into it. So that was that. I went back to my shack and I listened all the time on the 500 kilohertz frequency. There was other traffic going on. I could hear other traffic, other ships calling various coast stations, but nothing to the ship that I'd heard. I didn't hear SOS again, so I thought that's it. They've obviously done something. They've contacted him, they found the vessel or whatever, because there were no more SOS messages. I listened for I don't know how many hours it was, but quite some time, and just heard nothing. Well, nothing to do with this anyway. I heard other traffic on there. So that was that. And then I had a phone call. Funnily enough, it was my mother. She came out and she said, there's a phone call for you. Came down to the shed, so I went back indoors, and it was the Coast Guard. And initially I thought, am I in trouble? Is there no such ship? Well, there was. I mean, I had the message. I'd received it several times. Anyway, the Coast Guard said, thank you very much for alerting us. I thought, well, that's a good start. Okay, I'm not in trouble. He said, we located the vessel, and there was a fire. The engine had caught fire. All's well. Everyone on board is safe, and thank you so much. Stay tuned, sort of thing. He said, yeah, stay tuned, and let us know if you hear anything else. I actually felt quite pleased with myself. I felt quite proud. I might have saved lives if no one else had heard this Morse code SOS message. I was quite pleased with myself. And he said, thanks very much for contacting us. I said, oh, that's great news. And I thought that was it. And then he said, I never forget his words, just one thing I don't understand. And I thought, oh dear, here we go. He said, you receive this CW message. CW is Morse code. It's a continuous wave. On 500 kilohertz. I said, that's right, yes. And he said, due to the fire in the engine room, the engine fire, he said there are problems with the power, and all power to the radio room failed. So I said, oh, okay, right, not wondering what his point was. And he said the radio officer was unable to send SOS. So he went quiet for a minute, and so did I. And I said, but I heard it. And he said, yes, I know you did. He said, I know, this is the strange thing. He said, your information was 100% correct. The ship's name, the call sign, the coordinates that I gave. He said, that was 100% correct. He said, but they didn't send any Morse code message at all because the radio room was out of operation. I didn't know what to say to him. Someone sent the message. He was sort of waiting for me to say something, and I didn't know what to say. And in the end, I said, perhaps another ship sent it, another ship nearby. And he said there were no other vessels nearby at all. So I thought again. I said, well, someone sent it. I just kept saying, looking back, I sounded a bit silly. Someone sent it. I said, perhaps someone else from afar had seen it. He said, no, there were no other ships in the area. Right? No one could have known about the engine fire. There were no transmissions sent, radio transmissions from the ship. So I just said, oh, well, okay, I can't explain that. And he said, between you and me, in all my years in this job, he said, I have come across this sort of thing a couple of times in the past where we've received a message via someone, another ship or a member of the public or whatever, and he said he wouldn't go into details. Obviously he doesn't want people to know about this. He said, and there has been no message sent. He said there was one in particular, a message was sent from a fishing boat, a Morse code message, and the fishing boat had no radio equipment at all. Bear in mind, I'm going back to the 60s. They didn't all have radio equipment, just not local fishing boats. But a Morse code message was received, And he said to me, perhaps someone up there, some old seafaring dog or how, I said something, sea dog or whatever he said, made me laugh. He said, perhaps someone up there is watching over our seamen. I went back to my shack, my shed down the garden. I still had the radio tuned to 500 kilohertz. And I was just thinking, I was looking at the paper I'd written the messages on, engine fire, SOS, the coordinates. I used to record Morse code. This is what is such a shame. I used to record Morse code so I could play it back and practice later. I had the cassette tape recorder. All I had to do was click record and I would have had it on tape. I had it wired directly to the receiver. I didn't do that for some reason. I just didn't do that. So I was just thinking about the whole thing when I heard some Morse code. It was very quiet at the moment, very quiet. And I just heard Morse code. Thank you. That was it. Thank you. Sent 3 times. Where did that come from? Thanks for watching. I shall see you next time. Bye bye for now.